Welcome back now for the news in detail. United Nations human rights experts have urged India to release protesters who were detained earlier this year for rallying against the new Citizenship Act. In a statement, they criticized the Indian authorities for denying bail to them and invoking charges carrying heavy sentences. It said the protesters are being held in pre-trial detention without sufficient evidence. Several students and activists are also among those detained by Indian police. The Indian Parliament passed the controversial legislation in December 2019. It grants nationality to only non-Muslim immigrants from neighboring countries. Critics say the bill is part of an Indian government's agenda to marginalize Muslims. Over 80 people were killed during nationwide protests against the law, which is seen as discriminatory against Muslims. Pakistan has called on the international community to hold India accountable for its human rights abuses in occupied Kashmir. In a series of tweets on the International Day in support of victims of torture, Prime Minister Imran Khan said women, men and children have faced pellet guns, sexual assault and electrocution in the occupied valley. Khan said Indian forces' atrocities are well documented by human rights organizations and international media. He said a continuing silence in the face of India's abuses is against international rights, humanitarian laws, and must be unacceptable. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India's lies over a cut in High Commission staff are another diversion.
I mean, baseless. So it's just to divert attention. They have no answers, for the battering that they got in Ladakh, and to quell the domestic dissent, they want to refocus from line of actual control to line of control.
Pakistan has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to register a strong protest over ceasefire violations along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said unprovoked firing by Indian forces critically injured a civilian in Karela sector. Spokesperson Aisha Farooqi said Indian forces have continuously targeted civilian areas with artillery fire, heavy caliber mortars and auto weapons. Farooqi said India has so far committed 1,487 ceasefire violations this year, resulting in 13 deaths and critical injuries to 106 civilians. The spokesperson said these violations of international law reflect India's consistent attempts to escalate the situation. She said Indian actions along the line of control are a threat to regional peace and security. Indian troops have martyred 3 more Kashmiris, raising the toll for this month to 43. The civilians were killed during a cordon and search operation in Pulwama district. Police said the operation was underway in Chewa Ular village of the Tral area. Indian atrocities in the occupied valley have sharply increased despite the COVID-19 outbreak. The region has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 327 days. Latin America is still the epicenter of COVID-19 as Brazil recorded 1,141 deaths and Mexico reported 736 overnight. The Brazilian Health Ministry says more than 39,000 new cases were recorded in the past 24 hours. The United Kingdom has recorded 186 more deaths over the past 24 hours, bringing the nationwide death toll to over 43,000. Globally, the death toll has exceeded 488,000, while the cases have crossed 9.5 million. More details in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has been raging in LATAM as the region reported the highest number of daily deaths and cases. Mexico pushed past 25,000 deaths and 200,000 confirmed cases, while in the US, the death toll has crossed 154,000 with nearly 40,000 cases reported overnight. The governor of Arizona urged the state's residents to wear masks but stopped short of issuing any new order.
Our time of getting hit is right now. June, July, and August. I don't necessarily like to put these terms on what's happening here, but these are common terms that are being used around the country. This is Arizona's first wave, and this will not be our last wave.
The death toll in Africa has crossed 8,800 with more than 337,000 infections. Meanwhile, the chief of the World Health Organization says the pandemic is subsiding in Europe but getting worse globally.
The situation in Europe has improved. Globally, it's still getting worse. In the first month of this outbreak, less than 10,000 cases were reported to WHO. In the last month, almost 4 million cases have been reported. We expect to reach a total of 10 million cases and 500,000 deaths within the next week.
Elsewhere, China has recorded a further decline in new cases, with 13 infections in the past day. 11 were reported in Beijing, where mass testing has been carried out following an outbreak that appears to have been largely brought under control.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 59 people have died from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, taking the death toll to nearly 4,000. The Health Ministry said the number of overnight cases declined to 2,775 from yesterday's 4,000. The ministry said the country's infections tally now stands at nearly 196,000. It said over 2,800 people recovered from the virus in the past day, raising the tally to more than 84,000. The ministry said over 107,000 cases are active in the country. It said 2,765 patients are in critical conditions. Now, in the United Kingdom, 3 people have been stabbed to death and 6 others wounded in Scotland's Glasgow. In a statement, Scottish police said the suspected attacker has been shot dead by the security forces soon after the incident. Police said the situation is contained with no imminent danger to the public. Assistant Chief Constable Steve Johnson said the area has been cordoned off and the emergency services are currently dealing with the incident. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon condemned the attack and called it dreadful. Last week, 3 people died in the southern English town of Reading when a knife-wielding man went on the rampage in a park. The Belgian parliament has adopted a resolution urging the government to impose sanctions on Israel if it annexes parts of the occupied Palestinian territories. The resolution called on the government to play a leading role at the European and multilateral level to respond to Israeli plans. Earlier, Palestinian group Hamas warned that annexation of the West Bank will be a declaration of war. The United Nations has raised alarm bells in recent weeks over Tel Aviv's intentions, warning it could be irrevocable damage to the region's peace. Tel Aviv is expected to carry out the annexation of parts of the West Bank and Jordan Valley on the 1st of July. Libya's National Oil Corporation says Russian and other foreign mercenaries entered the Sharara oil field to block the oil output. In a statement, it said the corporation rejects attempts by foreign countries to prevent the resumption of oil production. In January, oil exports were halted by Eastern forces loyal to Haftar, cutting off Libya's main source of revenue. But after the UN-backed government made gains this month, the NOC attempted to restart production at 2 fields, including Sharara. Oil fields and export facilities are mostly located in territory controlled by the eastern-based Libyan National Army. The LNA is backed by Russia and the United Arab Emirates and Egypt. Now, Iraqi security forces have raided a headquarters belonging to a powerful Iran-backed militia in southern Baghdad. They detained more than a dozen members of Kataib HEZBOLLAH. The raid was the most brazen action by Iraqi forces against the militant groups in years. The paramilitary forces said those detained were transferred to the security branch of the Popular Mobilization Forces, but a government official denied any such transfer and said they were still in the custody of other security services. The raid follows a pledge made by the Iraqi government to the United States to take tough action against militia that have targeted U.S. installations. United States Democrats in the House of Representatives have signed a letter to Israeli leaders warning them against the plan to annex the occupied West Bank. The letter says Tel Aviv's plans will push the parties away from peace talks and the possibility of a final negotiated agreement. The letter warns the unilateral move will upend Israel's ties with its Arab neighbors and Europe. 191 of the chamber's 233 Democrats have signed the letter. Earlier, Israel announced plans to formally annex the Jordan Valley and the West Bank settlements, which it has occupied since 1967. In response, the Palestinian Authority has abolished bilateral agreements with Israel. Meanwhile, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says UAE and Tel Aviv have decided to cooperate in the fight against coronavirus. The cooperation comes at a time of strong Arab opposition to Israel's plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. In a speech, Netanyahu said the agreement stemmed from intensive contacts with Abu Dhabi over recent months. He said both countries will collaborate in research, development and technology to improve the well-being of the entire region.
This cooperation will be in research and technology development in areas that will improve the health security of the entire region. These are the results of continuous and intensive communications that took place over the past months. This will bring a blessing to many in our region.
Earlier in May, Abu Dhabi-based Etihad made the first known flight by a UAE carrier to Israel carrying coronavirus-related aid for the Palestinians. Now moving on, the United States has blacklisted 4 steel, aluminum and iron companies operating in Iran's metal sector. In a statement, the Treasury Department said Washington has also imposed sanctions on sales agents of Iran's largest steel company. It said the sales agents generate tens of millions of dollars for Iran's metals industry. The sanctions freeze any U.S. assets held by the companies and prohibit Americans from dealing with them. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said Iran continues to use profits from metals manufacturers to fund destabilizing behavior around the world. Tensions between Washington and Tehran have spiked since the U.S. unilaterally withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration has asked the Supreme Court to invalidate the Affordable Care Act. The law enabled millions of Americans to get insurance coverage and remains in effect despite the pending legal challenge. In a filing, government advocate Noel Francisco argued Obamacare became invalid after the previous Republican-led Congress axed parts of it. He said the act cannot survive once the individual mandate, the guaranteed issue and community rating provisions are invalidated. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Trump's campaign to rip away the HCA during a pandemic is an act of unfathomable cruelty. Former Vice President Joe Biden also dubbed the move cruel, heartless and callous. The justices will hear arguments in the case sometimes next term, although it's unclear if they will occur before the November election. Russia says Ukraine remains unwilling to find a comprehensive resolution of the Donbass conflict. This comes after the meeting of the political subgroup of the contact group for the settlement in Ukraine. Russia's envoy to the group, Boris Gryzlov, said the session focused on the Donbass conflict regulation and the ceasefire control measures. He said Ukraine is once again stalling the approval of necessary decisions. The envoy said it seems that the main goal of Kyiv is to maintain anti-Russian sanctions under any pretense. He said Moscow has reiterated its stance under the Minsk agreement to make special status for Donbass permanent. 16 people have been killed in two separate armed attacks in Mexico's western state of Sinaloa. The state officials said both gunfights took place in the violence-plagued region controlled by drug lord El Chapo Guzman. Security forces say they found the bodies of 7 alleged cartel hitmen on a dirt road next to a bullet-riddled pickup truck in Bagrecitos. The other shootout took place in a nearby small town, resulting in another 9 fatalities. Officials said 7 of them were local residents, while the other 2 bodies have not been identified. Sinaloa's State Minister Colonel Cristobal Castaneda said battles for territory between rival drug gangs have intensified in recent weeks.
It was clearly between organized crime groups operating in this area and involved competition between gangs. To give you an idea, from May 29th to the present, we have seized 40 heavy rifles, 5 mini machine guns, 2 Barretts, 10 grenades of different types, 35,612 cartridges, and 24 vehicles in the Tapuche area alone.
14 people have been killed after an armed group raided villages in northwestern Nigeria. Spokesman for the Katsina State Police Command, Gambo Isa, said the group burned down many homes during the attack. Isa said the armed bandits arrived on motorcycles and randomly opened fire on people. Meanwhile, Nigeria's Defense Ministry says it has destroyed 2 camps of armed gangs in its air raid. It said many gang members were killed and vehicles and ammunition was seized in the operation. The UN Security Council has adopted a resolution to extend the sanctions regime on the Democratic Republic of the Congo till July 2021. Security Council resolutions have imposed an armed embargo on groups in Congo, a travel ban on individuals, and frozen assets of individuals. The resolution won the unanimous support of the 15-member council. It also renews the mandate of the group of experts assisting the Sanctions Committee till August 1st, 2021. The resolution requests the group of experts to submit to the Security Council a midterm report no later than December 30th this year. Malawi's opposition leader Lazarus Chakwera is leading the presidential election rerun with 60% of the vote. State media says the tally is from all but 3 of the 28 districts counted. The state broadcaster said President Peter Mutharika is at second position with 39% of the vote. The Electoral Commission said it will take up to 2 more days to announce the official results of the rerun of the May 2019 election. It said they are trying to be as thorough as possible. Early on Thursday, the opposition alliance claimed victory for Chakwera. International donors have pledged $2.2 billion as support for Sudan's transitional government. This comes after a virtual Sudan Partnership Conference came to a close in Berlin. Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas announced that the European countries participating in the event pledged $1.8 billion, while the additional $400 million grant came from the World Bank. Addressing the closing session, Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok praised the efforts of the international community to support the country. He vowed his government will use the funds for reconstruction and fighting corruption, as well as to achieve the rule of law and democratic transformation. The UNICEF has warned millions of children in Yemen face starvation by end of the year due to massive shortfall in aid. In its report, UNICEF says the number of malnourished children in the country can jump by 20% to about 2.5 million. UNICEF's Yemen representative Sarah Niati said many will die if the agency does not get urgent funding. UNICEF needs nearly $461 million for its humanitarian response, of which only 39% has been funded. The UN says it's unable to keep an inflow of aid as the crisis shows no sign of ending. The death toll from lightning strikes and torrential rains in India has risen to 107. Officials say 83 people were killed in Bihar state, while 24 others fatalities were reported in Uttar Pradesh. They said 44 people were injured as high-speed winds and rain felled trees and electricity poles. Officials said the strikes also caused material damage and resulted in the deaths of some 40 animals. An emergency official said the victims were mostly farmers or homeless people. The Weather Bureau has forecast more storms in India for the coming days. Heavy rainfall has affected over 11 million people in more than a dozen provinces in southern and western China. State media says $3.4 billion were lost in direct damages, while 2.1 million acres of farmland was also affected. In a statement, the Flood Control Agency said rainstorms are expected to hit vast stretches of China from today. It highlighted a high risk of flooding, landslides and urban water logging. The Emergency Management Department of Jiangxi says over 37,000 people have been evacuated in 38 counties. China has had over 20 heavy rainstorms this year, the second highest number since 2013. In Afghanistan, the economic fallout of COVID-19 pandemic has left thousands of people without jobs. To overcome the crisis, the government has hired thousands of jobless workers to rehabilitate groundwater supplies in Kabul. More details in this report.
The Afghan government has started a water project to cope with the increasing demand in fast-growing Kabul. It uses trenches to capture rainwater and snowmelt, which is usually lost through flash flooding. For this purpose, Afghanistan is recruiting those who have lost their jobs due to the coronavirus-induced lockdown.
The main goal of this project is to control the surface water of the train in the mountains. Once we dig a trench, then we will plant a tree in it to save the water, and so the tree can benefit from the saved water. Also, a lot of people lost their jobs in Kabul due to the spread of coronavirus, so we have hired them to earn a living and to serve the country.
Planned to run for a year, the Kabul Water Project pays laborers at least 300 Afghanis a day to dig close to 150,000 trenches. The wages are modest, but crucial for survival.
This is a tough job, but I have to do it to earn halal food. Also, I take pride in the reconstruction of my country. This is good for the future of our country.
Experts say Kabul's groundwater supplies have been overexploited. A study shows that the city's groundwater levels have decreased by about 1 meter per year over the past 2 decades.
Since COVID-19 pandemic has stalled projects across the globe, it is also jeopardizing a pioneering northern white rhino conservation project. The project is facing delays as international travel restrictions have forced biorescue to delay some of its key procedures. More details in this report.
The northern white rhino is on the brink of extinction after the last known living male died in Kenya's Pajita Conservancy in 2018. Once found in several countries in East and Central Africa, its numbers fell sharply due to heavy poaching. The only surviving northern white rhinos now are mother and a daughter, Nain and Fatu, both infertile, making them the world's most endangered mammal. But researchers and conservation organizations have joined forces to save subspecies using pioneering artificial reproduction techniques. Researchers are harvesting immature egg cells from animals and fertilizing them with frozen sperm from diseased males.
Biorescue is trying to utilize the most advanced assisted reproduction technologies combined with stem cell technologies and to produce in vitro embryos which then will be transferred into surrogate mothers, and at the end to produce a viable, genetically sound population.
After 2 successful procedures to harvest oocytes in August and December last year, travel restrictions have forced scientists to postpone further procedures planned for May. Scientists said they are under huge time constraints because the 2 remaining female rhinos are aging, which will risk losing the creature.
We couldn't travel, we had to cancel our trips to Kenya, so that actually means we're losing time in our ambitious program. However, we found an alternative threat. Every scientist of our consortium was working national-wise to improve technologies, to make these things better, so that when we go back to Kenya, we will be even more effective and we will be more successful.
Scientists are hoping to deliver their first northern white rhino calf in 3 years and a wider population in the next 2 decades, bringing species back from the brink of extinction.
In Taiwan, dragon boat racers have competed in a scaled-back festival amid the COVID-19 fears. Athletes paddled vigorously in unison to the beat of the drum on the Keelung River. More in this report. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. With the weather updates, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can always follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.